All right. I would also ask that you all hold your questions until the end. We have a lot of content to cover, and I just want to make sure we get through it all. And your question might be answered at some point throughout our presentation. All righty. So our Survey and Planning Grant Program is our federally funded assistance program. The funding for this grant is sourced from the Historic Preservation Fund through the National Park Service. It is intended to aid in the identification, documentation, and eventual treatment of historic resources. This is an annual grant opportunity and is always due on October 31st. And I think it's important that you understand at the top of this presentation that it is a reimbursement grant, which means that your organization will be paid out only after your organization has spent the money necessary for your project. And that usually happens in 3 parts, and we'll get more into that in a bit. Today, Meredith and I are going to be giving a fairly comprehensive overview of the program, from the different types of projects that are eligible for funding to a complete timeline, start to finish of the grant.
All right, so like Claire said, we are kind of trying to cover it all with the Survey and Planning Grant today. And just so you know, up top, these are the 5 categories of projects that you're going to have to select your project to be, within one of these categories on your application. So keep your ears open. If any of these sound like your, the kind of work you want to undertake, this is what you're going to want to write down or check off. Also of note is the first 2 items are obviously for buildings that are not yet listed on the National Register or potentially have been but need updating. The last 3 items, however, are only for resources, and I'll kind of define resources down the road, but resources that are historic that are already listed in the National Register. So that's what we'll start. We'll kind of break these down piece by piece. So cultural resource surveys, these are often the very first step that we see nominations take, especially when it comes to historic districts. The example on the left is the city of Philippi. You can kind of see in that green outline those 2 different districts and how those interact. So this was the very first step, was undertaking this survey work for Philippi. So in terms of what this kind of project seeks to do, first it's going to identify resources. How many resources are we discussing here? What, and I'll also define each of these items that are italicized. So resources are buildings, sites, objects, structures. So you think bridges, think statues, think obviously historic districts like your main streets, but also residential housing. What are these resources and how many are we looking at for this particular project? So that's the first thing that this survey is going to figure out for you. And then what would be the uniting criterion, or in this case, theme, that would bring these items together? So for Philippi, it has to do with the development of the community. It has to do with the age of the resources. Most of them are well over 50, so they kind of are grouped in that way. But criterion is the word that we use in the National Register to ensure that the resources have some kind of tangible historic theme. So those are the things that are going to help kind of be identified. It's also a survey is going to help create a boundary. So what is the logical boundary? You can kind of see there's, like I said, those 2 boundaries shown here for the City of Philippi's district. So, where does it make sense to end a boundary? Do we kind of take it to the ends of the earth? We don't necessarily want to do that. We want to make sure that there is a logic there, that we aren't including, a bunch of demolished resource areas or a bunch of new construction when we can avoid it. And then how will the nomination justify those boundaries? So again, why are we creating those boundaries where they are? Philippi is kind of a unique one because it has the historic bridge that goes across. So obviously, there's that kind of like jutting out there. So, we kind of, again, look for a logical boundary there. And then to evaluate eligibility. So how many resources will actually contribute to this district? So, not every resource can contribute. It doesn't always have integrity. It might have been very severely altered over time, or could have been demolished. So we want to know those things. And then lastly, the survey is going to help you understand and us understand as well, if you should pursue listing this resource in the National Register. So what kinds of projects should seek survey? Basically, there are two kinds of projects. The first would be projects that seek to nominate or update a historic district and have yet to undertake survey work. So if you have done your survey work, you can, in the past 5 years, you can kind of move on to the next step, but this is the very first step if you have yet to. And then also archaeological projects that will determine if resources are present, below the surface. So if you have done your surveys, or if it is an individual building, or maybe just a small collection of buildings that are interrelated, then you would actually seek to apply for nomination funding to the National Register. So the National Register of Historic Places is what we use from the state perspective, but also the federal government uses, local governments use. It's the federal record of all of these resources I mentioned: buildings, structures, objects, sites, and districts that are deemed worthy of preservation. So when you see someone who says, I'm on the National Register, that's really what that is about. So again, any individual buildings like the Waiteville School here on the right, structures or objects that have been determined eligible by our staff here at the SHPO, which you can reach out to Cody Straley or Jessica Eichlin to determine if these are, potentially eligible. They can help you go through that process. The other kind of project would be for sites or districts that have previously undertaken survey work. So if there's a larger collection of properties and resources, and those were deemed eligible through that survey work. Pre-development. So when you are starting out, trying to make use of a historic property, pre-development is often where funding will be needed. So any activity necessary prior to the development of a property. Historic Structures Report is always kind of a great place to start. So this discusses the whole property's historic appearance and changes that have occurred over time. Has this sign on the Cooey-Bentz building on the right here been there for 100 years? Has it been there for 20 years? Has the window infill, that's that glass block, been there a while? We want to know how the building may have been altered over time. It also discusses present conditions, of course, and then it also gives recommendations for rehabilitation plans. So that can include some drawings, that can include, them saying, it is important to keep this, it's very important to keep this glass block in the Cooey-Bentz building. So that could be part of the recommendation. The other option, or another option, would be a feasibility study. So, is it feasible to rehabilitate this building? That's always a big question. Is it technically feasible? So are there the resources to do this? Is it able to be saved? And then is it financially undertakeable? So these are big questions. It's certainly to answer, and this pre-development funding can help with that. And then lastly, plans and specifications. So say you need to replace these windows on the Cooey-Bentz. Not saying that they should or that it's necessary, but if one were to replace them to a more historically appropriate appearance, then you could apply for this grant funding to create drawings for the new windows, or drawings for new use, new floor plans, things like that. Planning. So if you are part of a municipality, a landmarks commission, or an institution, this is probably for you, outside of the next topic upcoming. But planning is really for, sort of a collective district or community of resources. So the first option there would be a historic preservation plan. So this is going to outline strategies for the treatment of the resources in the community. It helps identify those resources once again, and it kind of talks about time periods that are important for the district and how to best go about preserving the history of the community. And then historic context statement. So this is a document used for interpreting history and historic resources. in the community or that might share a common theme. So similar to the preservation plan, but again, a little more kind of open-ended in a way. And then lastly, ordinances, regulations, or standards. So on the left here, we have the Lewisburg Historic District Design Guidelines. Not every community needs design guidelines, but it is helpful to have. It's a great way to point to the way that, property should be preserved, character defining features that are important to the community, and to interpreting the history of the community. So people who are, maybe buying a house for the first time in the area and rehabbing it kind of know where a good place to start is. And then the last of the 5 is heritage education. I think this is a really very cool part of the survey and planning grant program. It kind of has a wide range of abilities for you. So say you were to host a conference, a seminar, a workshop, this is great to fund those activities. Of course, always they need to be discussing preservation related subjects. They can't just be discussing like kind of history, open-ended history. It really needs to be about historic preservation, about maybe the resources in the area. So a little less about, individual, this battle happened here and people moved here and there. A little more about the built environment that we live in. Educational projects, so development and implementation of curricula supplements. So, if you're thinking a little bit, instead of sort of the smaller, like one-day event of like a conference, this is kind of long-term planning for maybe an intern program, teaching in your local high school about preservation, or courses that instruct in preservation-related subjects or techniques. So the photographs on the right are from Weston, where there was a masonry repointing workshop a couple years back. So they brought in the gentleman in green on the bottom right, Bob Yap, who's a pretty renowned preservationist out of Missouri, to lead this workshop for a week. And folks got to sign up from the community and learn how to repoint a building in downtown Weston. And then publications. So if you were to, say, come up with a design guidelines like in the last slide, and you want to print those and make those available to the public, or maybe a walking tour, that's a great way to print those materials. And lastly, any audio visuals, so videos, slide presentations, websites even, all of those things that can help instruct or educate on preservation related subjects.
All right. Once you've selected a project, you can choose one of the 5. It's time to get started on writing. A copy of the grant application is available on our website, and I've shared the link to that in the chat. But your application needs to be submitted to us via our grants portal, and I'm going to take you through how you can access that. So first, Go Apply can be found on our website under the Grants Opportunity page. If you scroll all the way to the bottom, you'll find the Go Apply logo. And if you click it, it'll take you to the login screen. Some of you may already have an account. For those who don't, you'll select Create New Account, and it'll take you to the registration page. Here you'll have the opportunity to register as an individual or as an organization. For individuals, it's pretty simple. We just need your name, email address, and for you to create a password. If you're representing an organization, you'll need to enter in your employer identification number, or EIN. If you don't have that, you can manually enter your organization's information, but this will need to be verified by our office. We conduct those reviews during work hours, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., Monday through Friday. Once that review is completed, your account will be activated, and we'll send you a confirmation email, and then you can get started. All right, once you're logged into the website, this is the screen you'll see. It may be confusing at first because the landing page is applications that you have currently in progress. So if you're looking for new applications, you'll need to click on the Opportunities tab, which is the 3rd from the top on the screen. From there, opportunities will list all available applications, including our ongoing programs like our Section 106 review and historic tax credits. In order to access the survey and planning grant, you will select View. I would recommend logging in to Go Apply at least a week before the deadline, just to ensure that you'll be able to edit the form and upload PDFs. If you have any questions or issues accessing the application portal, you can reach out to Susan Wood, our Information and Systems Coordinator. All right, so once you get inside, you'll see these 7 different parts, and all of our grant applications can be broken down into these 7 components. Each section helps us to understand the project and are important to the success of your application. So the checklist is here to remind you of all the important elements that are often forgotten when completing a grant, which is letters of support. We'll go over that more in a minute. And proof that your organization is able to pay for the work conducted during this project. Again, this is a reimbursement grant, so you'll have to show that you have some sort of money to cover allowable costs. You will also only be reimbursed for work completed during the grant period. And at the bottom of this, you'll need to confirm that you understand the reimbursement component of the grant before you can move forward. At the bottom of each page is this little button, Save Draft. Don't forget to hit it before going on to the next session. If you don't, all your progress would be lost. Application type relates to the types of projects which Meredith reviewed just a few minutes ago. You can only select one of these options, so please choose the best one that fits your project. The name will be used to identify your project throughout the process. It should succinctly describe what you're doing and where. For example, the town of Romney submitted a survey and planning grant last year, which was titled Romney Historic and Architectural Survey. Contact information, pretty straightforward. I would say you want to choose someone who is going to be on top of keeping in communication with our office. All right, project details. So we don't require for any of these questions that you meet any sort of word count, but you should answer all of the questions to the best of your ability and including as much detail as possible to discuss your project. From here, you can see we want to know the purpose and the needs you seek to address in your community, a detailed timetable of how you envision this project moving from, when we tell you you're receiving funding to your final grant report. What sort of preservation programs are already going on within your community and how that fits into that overall plan. And we also want to see projects that are going to have, a big community and a long-term community impact. Also in this section, you'll submit your letters of support, and you can submit up to 5 of those. Your letters of support should come from, your community partners, like a member of the Chamber of Commerce, or if you can get support from public and political officials. These letters demonstrate local and state investment in the project and the belief in the impact it's going to have on your community. All right. In order to fund your project, we will need estimates on hiring a consultant or the cost of purchasing whatever materials that would fall under the other category. The estimates shouldn't be, any sort of contract between you and that consultant. You're not hiring them yet. we just want like a ballpark figure. And in terms of actually selecting a consultant, you'll do that as part of our grant process. So I have an example. This is from a previous project, and you'll see they were interested in hiring a consultant to conduct a pre-development study. And this was pretty straightforward as a request. They knew it was going to cost $20,000. They did a 70-30 match grant, which we'll talk more about that later. So the 70 is what they were asking us to cover, the 14,000, and then the 6,000 is what their matching share was. All right. Now I got to go back. As you enter the numbers into the system, all totals will be calculated for you. This total should exceed 1,000. That's like our minimum and what we're interested in funding. This section will also want to know who will be involved in the project and a brief description of why they are qualified to participate in the programming. And we have certain qualifications that we require people involved to meet, set for us by the National Park Service. Since this is a matching grant, you'll need to demonstrate that you can cover the cost of the grant. In the donor line, you'll put the organization or the individual providing the funds. Then in the source line, you'll write in where these funds are coming from. For example, the Preservation Alliance of West Virginia for a recent grant was able to meet their match due to private donations. Then you'll fill in if it's in kind or a cash match. A cash match would be amount 1. In kind is for materials or time that's being donated, for your reference. If you're interested, no, that's not what I meant to say. So sorry. If you are matching the grant via combination, that's fine. You'll just, if it's coming from the same place, it'll be one donor, the source, in kind, and match amount. On this page, you can identify 2 sources for matching funds. You are only required to submit 1 document as evidence of matching funds. In most cases, this is bank statements, especially if it's a cash amount. And then here's just another example of what we're looking for. So on this page, you'll identify what type of application what type of applicant your organization is. This will be important for your grant matching, which Meredith will describe later. We will also need to know if you have received a grant previously from us. This helps us in our evaluation of your application. The signature at the end is an important element because with it, you acknowledge that all the work performed will be done in accordance with all applicable regulations and procedures, and that it will meet the Secretary of the Interior standards and guidelines. Finally, you'll have the opportunity to add attachments. Attachments can include things like consultant estimates and photographs. Photographs are really important in terms of giving us a fuller understanding of your project. They should be high quality, wide angle, multiple viewpoints, and they should, cover your whole project area. So I would also recommend reviewing the application to ensure that you have answered all questions and uploaded all necessary documents before you hit submit. All right. So once you've submitted your application to our office, they will be forwarded to our independent grant review panel. As our review panelists are reading your applications, they're looking for them to meet the following criteria, which you'll see on the screen. First, we want you to connect your project to the statewide historic preservation plan, which I'll drop in the chat in a minute. But this plan can be found on our website under the publications page. We have 5 goals that you can connect your project to identification, awareness, education, community and economic development, and stewardship. We'll also want to see that you already are making an ongoing and active commitment to local preservation programs, and that your proposed project fits into that programming. Your project should also either address issues or goals within your community or impact a selected resource area. In terms of matching capabilities in the budget, you should demonstrate the ability to match the grant through donated materials, volunteer time, or cash support. And you also want to show that you have a firm commitment for providing that matching share. If you have a grant with us, have had a grant with us in the past, we will also be evaluating if you've shown an ability to meet our grant requirements. In the sections like administrative capability, you're going to be asked to provide, or in the sections where you are asked to provide information about your staff. So sorry. You need to prove that you can successfully manage the financial responsibilities associated with the reimbursement process. For project methodology, you should provide a clear description of the need for this project in your community and clearly outline the steps for completing that project. As for the timetable and work schedule, in your application, we have that part where you need to give a detailed schedule or timetable. So we're just really looking to see how realistic that is, and that you're going to have tangible work products at the end of this grant. It's also important that your project benefits your community. So you should describe the project audience, the time span of the project, if it'll have a far-reaching impact on the community, and what your plan is to promote this project to the public. And then finally, overall, is this a quality application? Does it show that the project, from its scope of work to its budget, is realistic and achievable? In summary, we want to know what your project will make an impact on. Is it going to further state and institutional goals? And do you have the ability to effectively administer the grant? I thought it might be helpful if we quickly look at a few examples of funded applications and examine the elements that made them successful. So I've selected 3, the first of which is the Preservation Alliance of West Virginia. They submitted an application to fund a historic window repair workshop at Arthurdale Heritage in Preston County. PWV targeted the community's historic school buildings. As you can see on the screen, our panelists' overall comments were that it was a great application. That is, reflected in the detailed timetable, which you can see an example of, which breaks down all the activities that they plan to do on a month-by-month basis from the time that they are awarded the grant to the end of the grant period. When connecting the project workshop to the historic preservation plan and its goals, PWV selected 3 to focus on and pulled out specific objectives that they would fulfill through their project. For example, they argued that the window workshop spreads awareness of the benefits of historic preservation. Also in the application, they described how they plan to promote the workshop via their social media platform. And they also included numbers in terms of how much of a following they have across Facebook and Instagram. PWV also demonstrated a strong knowledge of their community partner, Arthurdale Heritage, its programs, and they provided a clear and concise understanding of the community benefit. All right. We also have the Douglas Junior and Senior High School, and the project for this grant was to create a comprehensive plan for the restoration of the gym and theater. Our panelists highlighted that this project had good letters of support, so I thought we'd take a brief look at the elements that make this letter successful. Depending on what you can see, the letter has a clear understanding of what the grant is, who it's coming from in the first couple of paragraphs. They also showed that they understood what the applicants were asking to fund and the potential community impact. So it's not just some basic boilerplate letter of support that says, hey, this is a great project, please give them money. It shows an understanding of why it's a great project. Our final example is the application for a National Register nomination to be written to list the William Cooper Stiles Mansion Complex. Our panelist said the application was very informative, which includes their detailed table of possible contributing resources and properties. In the project details section, they also clearly articulated how the mansion complex fits into the region's heritage tourism industry. And as you can see on the screen, they had a wide array of support from organizations within their community or within their county. So from these examples, just keep in mind that each of these projects had good letters of support, which demonstrated community investment, and their applications also clearly articulated the importance of this project through a variety of information.
Okay, so the million-dollar question, right? How much grant match do our grants provide? Well, first I'll start by talking about that this is a project, or a program rather, that is funded by the Federal Historic Preservation Fund, and that is given to us via the National Park Service. And so if you are a member of a certified local government community, which we have 55 of in West Virginia, so reach out to me if you want to know if you're within a CLG. But those partners, via the Historic Preservation Fund and sort of Congress's appropriations, must receive 10% of our federal grant. So the grant that provides funding for us to do our jobs here and provides funding for this grant, 10% of that must be allocated to our CLG partners, which we're always happy to do. It's great to see this money go to local initiatives. So if you look down to the match rate here, if you're a non-CLG applicant, I don't disencourage you to apply. It is still a pretty good match rate of our office providing 60% of the funding and you providing 40% of the funding. And then CLG applicants get a little bit of a better rate where we provide 70% of the funding and you just are responsible for 30%. So if you are interested in partnering with your local Historic Landmarks Commission that is a CLG, or your local town that's a CLG, that could be a good way to increase your match rate. So a good thing to note is that our match, since it is federal, cannot be matched by another federal funding source. There are some exceptions, like with CBDG funding. So definitely look into that. But for the most part, federal funding can't match federal funding across the board. So you always want to make sure that 30 or that 40% is not coming from a federal source. And also of importance is that this is a reimbursement grant, so we don't kind of just write a blank check. We do work with you throughout the process, and we actually make payments along with, or you make the payments to the consultant rather, in thirds usually. So a third up front, a third in the middle, and then a third at the end, just to make sure that we're kind of working alongside you, and throughout we will reimburse you that part of our match. So. And then a timeline. So, a lot of folks might not realize how much, work goes into this behind the scenes and why it does take so long to hear back when you apply for grants. So I'll kind of go through the timeline so you can get a sense of what's going on kind of behind the scenes. So as we mentioned, October 31st is always when grant applications are due to our office. And then January of 2025 is when we select an independent review panel that's going to go through all of the applications, read them, score them, and recommend funding. And why that's so late after October is because we have to wait until late February of each year for the Archives and History Commission to meet. So they only meet 3 times a year. So the way that it always works out is that it's February. So we want to make sure that the independent review panel has time to read these grants and then get their recommendations to the Archives and History Commission. So that commission is ultimately responsible for approving or rejecting those funding recommendations from the independent review panel. And so they will make that decision. Then the governor's office has final review of that funding. So it goes over to our east, as it were, from our building. And then by mid-March, that's when we can actually announce the grant awards. So once those are announced, in early April, we held a grant training virtually. And so you'll get on with all of your fellow grantees, and we'll kind of walk you through all the paperwork and how the contracts and procurement documents work. We will also assign a grant monitor to you from our staff. So one of us will be with you, and we've got Cody Straley on the call, I think, Jess Eichlin, Claire, and myself. You'll be kind of partnered with one of us. So we will also be there to make sure that we're following, procedure, and that, you're getting a good product ultimately as well. So late June 2025 is usually when bids are received from consultants after we've gone through procurement, and you can actually select who you'll be working with. July of 2025, generally speaking, these are sort of open-ended towards this end of the timeline, but that is usually when we want to see the contract signed between you and the consultants, and then the consultant can begin work. So then the consultant has from about July or August of 2025 until September of 26 to be undertaking that work. So monthly status reports are usually what we are looking for, and then we will also work with you on reimbursement requests. But for the most part, it should be a lot of work with the consultant, and the consultant should be doing, obviously, the heavy lifting where applicable. And then September 30th of 2026 is when the project should wrap up. That's when the final report is due to our office. Any final reimbursement requests come into us, and we get to have this really great product at the end from this grant program.
All right, so applications are due by 11:30 p.m. On October 31st, and of course they can be submitted via our grants portal on the website. I'm more than happy to review any drafts and make suggestions on your application ahead of time, but to ensure that I have enough time to make those comments, they need to be submitted to me by October 24th at the end of the day. After that, I just won't have enough time to review them in full. All right. So thank you all for your time and attention. We're going to open the floor for questions. Real quick, I'll just add that if you have a project-specific question, we're happy to go into that with you at a later time. You can either stick around after the meeting ends, or you can shoot us an email, give us a call. So please feel free to unmute yourself or write your question in the chat.